Good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us. As we continue our conversations with Black leaders from our community, we are thrilled to welcome veteran television journalist and author Cheryl Wills as our speaker today. Most of us know Cheryl as the longtime anchor of New York's One Live at 10 and the host of In Focus. She has been in New York One since its founding in 1992, keeping us all informed about our community and world news for nearly 3 decades. Whether you actually know her personally, so many of us really feel like we know her well. Our ABNY crowd are hardcore New York One watchers, so Cheryl is literally in our homes and in our offices every single day. Through some of our city's most tumultuous times, 9/11, Hurricane Sandy, and now the pandemic, Cheryl has been there to give us essential news and information we can trust and rely on for important choices, decisions about our lives and our community. Journalism is an essential public service, critical to our health, critical to our democracy, our society, and our communities. As a journalist, Cheryl's in-depth interviews and discussions with some of our city's most pressing issues have earned her great distinction. She's an Emmy Award winner and the first African-American journalist at New York One to earn an Emmy. She's been recognized and honored by her peers for her journalism and her excellence in journalism, most notably the Associated Press and the New York Press Club. And she is the only New York One reporter to ever interview a sitting president, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf of Liberia. She is a powerful storyteller, and she has a powerful and fascinating personal story. In addition to her deep experience in media, fighting for civil and equal rights, for racial justice, is quite literally in her DNA. She is the great-great-great-great-granddaughter of Sandy Wills and Emma Wills, Sandy Wills, who escaped his enslaver to enlist in President Lincoln's Union Army and join the historic fight for freedom during the Civil War. Her family's remarkable history is the subject of her acclaimed biography, Die Free, A Heroic Family Tale. Having her voice and her perspective as a leading journalist and author, as someone who helps us understand our city and our world each day, truly elevates us all. We're grateful she's here today to share her perspective and her experiences. Now, before I introduce our moderator, there's someone else I want to recognize and some good news I'd like to share from our ABNY community. This conversation series was conceptualized and launched by Melva Miller, who joined ABNY in 2018 as our to lead our efforts on the 2020 census. Time and again, Melva has proven herself to be a passionate, compassionate, and effective leader, a dedicated organizer, and one of our city's foremost advocates. Under her leadership, ABNY has partnered closely with government and worked with over 200 community-based organizations to raise awareness and drive participation in the census during this critical time. It was a real coup for us to get her away from Melinda Katz and the Queensborough President's Office back then, and this has worked out better than we had all could have hoped, and we are thrilled to announce that Melva will be ABNY's new Chief Executive Officer, a position that has been open since the end of last year. We could not be more excited. As the chair of ABNY, I'm thrilled that Melva agreed to take on this new role. I look forward to continuing to work closely with her, as well as Laura Colacurcio, who has served these past few months as our acting director. Laura will become ABNY's vice president. I want to thank Laura for her commitment and the terrific work she did during this time. I want to congratulate Melva and say that Melva, Laura, and I all look forward to partnering with all of you in the time ahead to help New York. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator for today's conversation, Camille Joseph Goldman, someone I know many of you know. She is the Group Vice President of Government Affairs at Charter Communications and a committed member of our ABNY community. In her role at Charter, she oversees and manages all government affairs, strategic partnerships, consumer protection initiatives, and telecommunications regulation from New Jersey all the way to Maine. Prior to working at Charter, she was one of New York's most visible public servants. In her past roles, she has been Deputy Controller for Public Affairs for Scott Stringer, National African American Vote Deputy Director for Obama for America, and a trusted advisor to Senator Kristen Gillibrand. Camille, thank you for your commitment and all you do. I'm going to pass the Zoom over to you.
Thank you so much. And first, let me thank ABNY for underscoring the importance of this conversation. And I'm so excited to be here today. Cheryl remains a mentor and a friend and a true leader, not just in New York State, but throughout the nation. And I just want to say to Abney that, at a time such as this, given everything that's going on in the world, not only are you underscoring your commitment by having and facilitating this conversation, but in addition to your incredible team, Laura, Annette, and others who we have the joy of working with to do this today, I did want to laud Melva and her promotion today. The best way to celebrate Black history is to make it. And so Melva, congrats again. With that, Cheryl, I'm so excited to have this conversation with you. I'm a bit nervous. So we tend to be very candid with one another. And I feel like now one of our chats is being recorded, but I want to start off, I think you are, to me and to so many people, you are so many different hats. But I think you are most recognizable by this crowd as a terrific journalist, a wonderful anchor. But you are kind of, I think, the embodiment of what New York One promotes. You are a native New Yorker, speaking in a way and reflecting the interests of New Yorkers like no one else can. You are the daughter of a first responder. You have roots deep in Queens. I know people who claim Harlem on your behalf. And so I wanted to get started by imploring you to share kind of how your path has been so unique as a New Yorker, as you've navigated kind of your own success as a journalist. What has been kind of the biggest contributing factor pursuing this path that you think being a New Yorker made all the difference?
What a great first question. Thank you, Camille, for that lovely introduction. And just give me a moment to please thank Stephen Rubenstein for his leadership and for elevating Melva, which is so important, especially during the times we are living in. Congratulations, Melva. We are so proud of your leadership as well. And to the entire ABNY team, thank you for having me. So Camille, to answer your question directly, yeah, I do feel, I wish I was born in Harlem sometimes because I love Harlem. I will say this, my maternal grandparents during the Great Migration met in Harlem and married right during the heart of the Harlem Renaissance. So I have a special connection and love for Harlem and all the people who live there. Many people think I live there when I actually don't, but I do claim it, and the people. And growing up in Queens, I got to tell you, I come from very humble beginnings. As you noted, my father was a firefighter. And I think being born in Queens, living in public housing, coming from such humble roots, and also, Camille, my life was steeped in tragedy. Unlike so many people that I've met along my journey, I didn't have any connections to journalism. I didn't have anyone really mentoring me. I was a little skinny brown girl in public housing, and my father was killed in a motorcycle accident when I was 13 years old. And that shook my very foundation. It's a miracle I'm talking to you now. It's a miracle anyone actually cares about me, because the stage was set for my derailment. And growing up, not having role models in journalism other than what I could see on television, and there weren't a lot there either. My father's untimely death, Camille, at the age of 13, shaped me. And what I mean by that is, one of the last questions he asked me before his doomed motorcycle ride across that bridge was, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I didn't know what the word journalist was. And I just said, well, I love interviewing people. And I had interviewed my entire family. I had interviewed my mother's father, who was a Black soldier who served in a segregated unit during World War I, not II, I. I interviewed my paternal grandparents about how they migrated from the deep South and what was it like to pick cotton and what was it like to see people lynched. I was a born journalist, and I didn't know how to say it. And he said, oh, you mean you want to be a journalist? I see them all the time when I'm on the job. He was a firefighter in Midtown Manhattan. And so, I wanted to prove to myself, Camille, that after getting knocked on the chin, that I could do this without having someone pick up the phone and make a call for me. Like I see so many people now, Cheryl, can you take care of I didn't have anyone I could call. So that's why I feel that being a New Yorker, you know, I was watching a Frank Sinatra documentary and it was riveting. It's a 2-part on Netflix. And the way he sang that song, New York, New York, I felt that. And, you know, that's what it means to me to be a New Yorker. If you can make it here, you can make it anywhere, right? So my story has a lot of bumps and bruises, but I'm still standing.
And I think that leads me to my next question. And thank you again, Cheryl. I think that, you know, what's interesting about what you just shared is that you very much started in a place where you were sharing the stories and experiences of people who looked like you.
Yeah.
And I will say that your presence on New York One is really an extension of that. And I wanted to discuss how that impacts your process, because as a point of privilege, and we'll get to this later in the interview, there's so much to be said about kind of national figures, whether it's former First Lady Michelle Obama, whether it's the presumptive vice presidential candidate for the Democratic Party, Senator Kamala Harris. But for me, being in New York, you know, I didn't have to wait until, you know, 2008 to have someone kind of on my TV screen normalizing the depiction of what I look like on a nightly basis. Right. I think for a woman of color, you have, you know, it's funny, you mentioned, you're like, oh, no one really picked up the phone and made calls for me. But in an unknowing way, you've made calls for so many women who look like me, because you've normalized, right, the experience in the homes of so many New Yorkers, to hear truth to power from someone who looks like me, my complexion, from the city that we love so much. And so I just want to know, how does that continue to inform and shape your process? You are much more than just a voice for the Black community, but you are a Black voice. And so how does that shape your reporting? How does that shape your due diligence as a journalist? What do you think how that has informed your experience on TV and as a journalist?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. It has informed my entire career. Growing up in public housing, I saw these tragedies that I currently report on firsthand. And I bring a sensitivity to my reporting because of it. You know, I wasn't born in any ivory tower. In addition to my father's tragic death, I had an uncle when I was in kindergarten murdered in cold blood in a domestic violence incident. His wife killed him. And I never saw his children, my cousins, again. And sadly, I am reporting these very stories today. Children whose lives are suddenly ripped apart by violence, Camille. And I am very careful to give them the respect on the air, because, you know, you can be flippant and people see when anchors are flippant. Oh, here's another story about, you know, Black folks killing each other and coming up, the weather. I'm very careful with that.
Yeah,
I really am, because these are lives that have been turned upside down and they will never be the same. And that happened to me more than once as a child. So I think that having those humble experiences, those tragic experiences, has made me a stronger journalist. It's made me more compassionate. And yes, Camille, I pick up the phone for girls that look like you now, because I never had the opportunity to pick up the phone and say, hey, Auntie, can you call CBS News or whatever and get me the job? So I gladly mentor so many girls, really girls of all backgrounds, but I do, of course, have a soft spot for girls of color. And I mentor so many, I cannot keep up. But it's a blessing on my life. What you give, it's the gift that keeps on giving, right, Camille? When you give your time, when you make those calls, when you look at someone's resume tape or resume, and, you know, I will never forget the journey. The journey is still in progress, Camille, but I will never forget the journey and forget the people who supported me on my way up. You know, Camille, I'll end with this. I had an aunt who really had hard times growing up. And she saw me at Syracuse University, and I came home, and I remember looking at her, and she said, "Don't stop what you're doing." I mean, I get choked up just thinking about it. You know, she didn't have the chance to go to college. She made some choices that derailed her life. And I could tell she looked at me, what I was about 19, and you could tell she said, "I couldn't see it when I was 19. And there are so many people that live in our city who lose their way and can never find their way back.
Yeah.
And I really try to serve as a beacon, especially for the women, because Camille, you're a new mom. I'm an older mom. But when you have a strong mother, that mother can save and change the trajectory of her entire family. And so that's why I'm all about saving the girls. I love the boys. I have one son myself, but the children come through the mother. And if the mother's strong, and if the mother has focus, and if the mother is on course, on the proper course, she can change the entire trajectory of her family.
Oh, absolutely. You know, Cheryl, you know, I am the daughter of accented Americans. I'm first generation American.
I like how you accented American.
It's important because I take it as a point of privilege and pride. But you know, my parents came to this country at a time where, you know, that accent was not seen as privilege. You know, English wasn't my father's first or second language. But I want to kind of echo the sentiment. I would not be here if not for her efforts. And I mention it because I know she's watching. So I love you, Mom. Separately, though, I just I want to follow up on something important that you said.
Yeah.
The importance of the work that you're doing to highlight the voices of stories that perhaps won't be covered otherwise, right? I think we're living at a time where kind of even locally, there is the tendency to kind of consume some of these social justice, social impact stories virally. You know, if it has 3,000 likes, if it has 1 million views, all of a sudden it arises or it becomes a part of our consciousness as viewers. And there's often like a social activism attached to it. I actually think, Cheryl, your challenge is greater because you're charged with making these stories pronounced they're not viral. You're bringing import to a discourse that's happening all around us. I mean, what happened with George Floyd was horrific, but especially as New Yorkers, it's not the first time we've seen that. And it's really your task with that job, right? To bring that degree of import. I'm just curious, you've been doing this for like over 28 years, honestly. You've been in Oregon for 28 years, but you've really been doing this for some time.
Yeah.
Have you found it kind of more difficult given, you know, where the public perspective is now? Or has it been what's happening around us? Has it made your experience as a journalist who's bringing these stories, has it made it easier? You noted the challenges, but I'm wondering about the ebb and flow of that. How have you seen kind of those challenges evolved? And given your positioning now, you know, what is the difficulty that you still face to kind of highlight these stories?
Yeah, I love that question. I'll tell you, to your point, a couple of years ago, a boy in the Bronx was attacked by a gang and killed. And I remember the story came across that the next day, and it was just seen as another random killing in the Bronx. And that never sits well with me. Don't ever come at me with, oh, just another killing. I feel them. And that's also a problem because, you know, it's a city of 8.5 million people, and sadly people get killed every day. But I don't allow myself to become numb to it. I want to feel it. That was someone's son. That was someone's daughter. That's how I approach every story. And I remember I said to my colleagues, this story, this boy was a young teenager. I think we better, look into this. And, no one did anything wrong, but it was like, but it's over and the police haven't done anything yet. And then the video of Junior being hacked to death and screaming and pleading for his life in a bodega emerged. And as you so eloquently put, I, along with my colleagues, was tasked with making our city see that we cannot allow this to be business as usual. He was just entering high school. That was someone's son. He wasn't involved in gang activity. He was a good kid. Even if he wasn't, no kid should be hacked to death and left to die in the street. So I, along with my colleagues, was tasked with bringing life to Junior. And I am proud to say, Camille, even on our show In Focus that we work so hard on week by week, I interviewed his father on the show. I interviewed many activists, and we have a monumental task ahead of us. We cannot allow our city to think that, oh, it was just a kid from the South Bronx killed. Okay, happens every day. I feel my responsibility as a journalist is to let everyone know this is not normal, and I am not going to let you think it's normal. I'm going to be in your face saying Junior's name every night, and I was. And we did different takes on it. We covered his funeral, and we didn't stop after the poor child was buried. We continued to speak his name and talk about what the NYPD was doing to honor his legacy, and they did an incredible job rounding up the alleged perpetrators, and that is a huge responsibility on my part. And that's where my job almost becomes a public service, right? Charter Spectrum is a for-profit, but this is almost like a public service. We cannot let our viewers think that some lives are expendable and can be snuffed out, and we just carry on. And I was very proud of our coverage of Junior in the Bronx. And sadly, there have been so many more Juniors. A young man named Brandon, 15 years old, Camille, was killed on the basketball court. He didn't even know what hit him. He had just graduated from high school and he was headed to college. I wanted the viewers to feel that too. A 1-year-old was killed in his stroller in Brooklyn. A 1-year-old. So I can rattle these tragic stories off, of course, but it is important that we as New Yorkers get a handle on the violence that's plagued our city. Our children should not be dying like this. This is not normal. I have the privilege, Camille, of speaking at schools all over the country prior to the pandemic, of course. And I would go to some rural areas and I would say, raise your hand if you know a student, a fellow student that's been killed, imprisoned. And you know what? No one would raise their hand. I go to the South Bronx. Can you raise your hand if you know? All the hands go up. So I'm really proud to be part of this talk because it's by the Association for a Better New York. You want a better New York? We have to stop sitting idly by as our children are butchered and gunned down in the streets of New York.
Agreed. And that, something that you said, really struck a chord given the audience, because you, Cheryl, said it's not business as usual.
That's right.
And I think a lot of the folks watching this are from the business community. And I think that we're at an interesting point where people are starting to think through, what does social justice mean?
Yeah.
not just in our homes, but the places in which we work. And how are we leveraging accountability through a corporate perspective or a business perspective? And so I think that folks who are watching this would be eager to hear your recommendations. You know, if it's not business as usual, Cheryl, what are our marching orders? What can we do to help you in this? What makes sense for us right now, given what's going on in New York City?
Yeah, you know, we are at a crossroads here, Camille, in New York City. That is for sure. And the reaction to George Floyd, not only in New York City, but all across the world, spoke volumes. I remember the day after, okay, George Floyd was killed on Memorial Day. And the day after, I woke up, I checked my phone like we all do, and there was the video right in someone texted me the video. I couldn't believe it. And the first thing I said, Camille, was, wow, if we weren't in the middle of a pandemic, people would be marching like crazy over this. And was I wrong? New Yorkers marched like never before. People of all backgrounds, people of all age groups, every persuasion, they marched every day because they were fed up, they were furious, they were embarrassed. You know, when we see these videos, we again become numb. You couldn't get numb to that officer's knee. If you can look at that and go, oh, what else is new, then something's very wrong with you. That video spoke volumes because that officer did not see a human being beneath his knee. He saw an object that he felt he was empowered to judge life or death, and he chose death. And that woke the world up. So in my view, what we need to do is we need to keep the pressure on. We need to keep the pressure on the media. We need to keep the pressure on every governmental agency. We need to keep the pressure on elected officials. We need to know who our elected officials are. We need to make sure we vote. We need to make sure all the kids turning 18 vote. I'm not going to say who they should vote for, but just vote. Exercise your right to vote. Be involved. Mentor. We can stop this. Camille, we really can put an end to this, but we're so busy taking care of our, own agendas that people are running amok and saying, what can I do? We've been here before, Camille. During slavery, so many Americans threw their hands up and said, well, what can I do? 4 million people are enslaved in the South, but everyone started to do their little part, even here in New York and in the South. Harriet Tubman is my all-time favorite because she left the North and returned to the South over and over. She didn't bring back 4 million slaves. She brought back a few dozen. But what Harriet Tubman...
Kanye West is listening to you right now.
Don't even say that name to me. But and I'll end with this. What Harriet Tubman knew, Camille, was that she had a ripple effect. And her rescuing people who were in bondage over and over had a ripple effect, and her courage seeped through the entire country. And before you knew it, the Civil War happened, and slavery, the death knell was issued for slavery. John Brown, so many people did little acts of courage, and that's what we need now. We need little acts of courage. Don't look at a city of 8.5 million people and say, there's so many people here. What can I do? You know what I do, Camille? I go into school by school and share the story of my Civil War soldier grandfather, Sandy Wills. And I say, there's so many of you in this school who have stories of courage in your family. Would they be pleased with you taking a detour and taking the easy way out and selling drugs and gang banging? Do you really think that's what the struggle was about? And I'm getting kids when they're in elementary school, middle school, high school, little acts of courage. I don't have to do it. I'm gainfully employed, right? But this is what I see as a little act of courage. And I think if we all did that, And behind me, I have a cover, but I have so many letters from children who have said, I didn't see it that way. I didn't know that, I even had ancestors who possibly did anything worthy of my reflection. And I'm always pleased to tell them, you do. You do. If I do, you do. And I don't care what corner of the earth they came from. They're worthy, not just of your reflection, but you need to build on what they started. Don't punk out. So little acts of courage can change the mess that we're in. Little acts of courage. We need to be at the basketball courts when the kids are playing because they're being gunned down while they're shooting hoops. We need to be there. Our men need to be there, guarding them, protecting them. Our women need to be protecting our children, not letting them just watch music videos that are encouraging them, like this new video out, which is so vulgar. I'm not even going to say the name because I don't want to insult anyone personally, but there's a video out that is so vulgar for little girls, and it's encouraging them to just, you're nothing but, your private parts.
Sure.
Work that, girl. That's
Sure.
the wrong message for our girls. And we need people to volunteer and say, nope, this group of girls, we're going to let you know that your private parts are very private and they're not to be, shown in a video and, like all you're here to do is indulge in your private parts. That's really not why you're here. That's not why you made the road trip for 9 months in your mom's belly and came here. You are a brilliant source of light, full of fire. You can change the world. Let's do that. We need to stop giving up on our children.
Listen, Cheryl, I think that we would all benefit greatly from just a small dose of your courage. And I do strongly believe that a lot of your work and the work that you're doing is informed by your unique experiences, whether that intersectionality at times means more through a gendered experience or a racial experience. And I think we should mention that, yesterday marked a very key anniversary for women everywhere.
Yes.
And that was kind of the right to vote. And I bring it up because you're talking about young women, you're talking about girls and the courage, and you invoked, Harriet Tubman and so many other kind of great pioneers in this effort. But I also think it's a good moment, given what we're seeing nationally, with who the next vice president could be, to kind of remind folks of the path and the challenges faced by African-American women in particular. I wish I could say that, yesterday marked the anniversary for our right to vote, right? When we both know that it really wasn't until the 1960s, the dismantling of the Jim Crow era of segregation, that really African-American women were able to emerge in a strong force. And I say that with pride because, in many ways, a new struggle and a new journey then began. Right. But yet from that point, from, the view of a conscious voter, a voting body that comes out and labors for political interest in numbers as, right, as an economic engine for this nation, African-American women have and continue to do so much, and that really starts with you. So I wanted to know, given all of that, what are you seeing as far as what this will mean for the work that you're doing, the work that African-American women like you are doing, and the credit that it's given? Well, what do you think that means for us?
Yeah, I think, first of all, happy anniversary to us all. What the women, the suffrage movement, Susan B. Anthony, and so many others, and many abolitionists, by the way, the women's suffrage movement grew out of the abolitionist movement. And so we are married in that respect. Women were liberated to an extent once they got the right to vote. They still had a long way to go in economics and business and so forth, but this was a strong start. And I believe, Camille, that we need to remember the sacrifices of people like Sojourner Truth, who said at a convention in upstate New York, when she saw that African-American women were not at the forefront of women's suffrage, she said, "Ain't I a woman? and she gave a passionate speech about it. So as we look ahead with the importance of voting and the historic nature of Senator Kamala Harris and Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden, we need to understand that this was a long time coming. And some Americans take things for granted, and they may be taking the historic nature of Senator Kamala Harris's nomination for granted. And listen, you vote for who you want on any side of the political spectrum, but this was a long time coming. Shirley Chisholm, we can't forget her. We can't forget Bella Abzug, the many women, especially here in New York, who paved the way.
Mhm.
And I believe that when we acknowledge the past, we empower the future. And I think that we don't, to your point, to specifically answer your question, we don't have enough civic lessons in schools. And I think that's a big missing piece of the puzzle. I think children need to be taught the importance of the vote, because there are too many people who turn 18 who don't register to vote. We know that. You know, sometimes it's the last thing on their mind. And that is sad, considering that women were beaten leading to the road of 1920. They were beaten. They were ostracized. And for an American girl to turn 18 and not register to vote means, A, she probably doesn't know who Susan B. Anthony is, or many of the women who participated in this, in Seneca Falls and so forth, but she may not care. She may think her vote is not important. And no matter where you live, even if you live in a solid blue state like New York, your vote is always important. We can't tell you who to vote for, but your vote is critically important. People died for you to vote. And to your point also, Camille, when it comes to African Americans, God bless the soul of John Lewis. He was literally beaten bloody for African Americans to vote. And what I like to point out, African Americans should not have been fighting for the right to vote in the mid-1960s. They already had it. They already had it. But there were organized groups that were skilled in voter suppression. I mean, voter suppression, they outright told them, you can't vote because you're Black. I mean, it was insanity that they had the rights, but yet the rights were infringed. So we have to understand what's happening now. As a journalist, I'm very concerned about voter suppression for this coming election. Voter suppression is real. I watched Stacey Abrams' address during the convention, and I think we all know that voter suppression was involved with her historic run for governor. And this is not a game. Voter suppression is real. And we need to pay very close attention and stay organized. Because a great price was because a great price was paid.
Exactly. And two things. One is, and I want to thank all our participants. If you guys can continue to share questions, or if there are things you'd like me to raise for Cheryl, please feel free to do so. But Cheryl, as you talk about organizing and you talk about movements, I think we're all witnessing a lot of movements across the nation, even here locally, both through a gendered space, whether it's Me Too or women activity or female-led activity, and also Black Lives Matter. And I wondered, as you talk about, pushing people to organize and pushing people towards being more clear on the importance of that mobilization, what role do you think those two movements have played to either accelerate that process and help that process, or what challenges you think perhaps that type of mobilization creates?
Yeah, well, they have tremendous challenges, that's for sure. They got Black Lives Matter got a major boost after the death of George Floyd, of course. People of every background were holding Black Lives Matter signs, and that was not the case just a few short years back. So that was a very encouraging sign. But again, people try to hijack the message, and they try to hijack the very acronym. Black Lives Matter, BLM, doesn't mean no one else's lives matter. That's not what that means. It just means that Black lives matter as well as all other lives. It's
Sure.
not that Black lives just matter and your lives don't. And some people have cleverly tried to misconstrue what that movement is all about. So I think that's a major challenge for them, not to let their message be hijacked by people with ill will. And of course, we've had some very prominent people call them a terrorist organization. During the protests, there were other infiltrators who were literally causing damage. We know that now. And it wasn't even Black Lives Matter that was doing it. But they knew that the guilty parties would be viewed as Black Lives Matter, when actually some of the rioters were with white supremacist groups, just to make Black Lives Matter look bad. So that was very hurtful to see. And so that's one of the major challenges that Black Lives Matter faces, you know, protecting the integrity of what they started and keeping people on message, keeping everyone on message. You know, they're basically saying, if someone kills a Black person, as in the case of Breonna Taylor, right? I don't think anything's clearer. She was innocent. She was a city worker. She had never done anything wrong. They made a mistake, went into her house, they killed her. All of the people involved haven't been charged. So ultimately they're saying, oh, well, her life didn't matter. That's really what, you know, until someone is held accountable, that's what they're saying. Well, you know, if that was someone else, then there would be accountability, but her life didn't matter. And that sadly has been the narrative of African life in North America. Your lives don't matter. We can enslave you. Your life doesn't matter. And that was law for a very long time, regrettably, in this country. Black lives didn't matter. They were literally counted as 3/5 of a human being. They were enslaved. Children were sold away from their mothers in the most horrendous way. Families were broken up as if two Black siblings wouldn't miss each other and didn't have a bond, because their lives did not matter. So I think that the Black Lives Matter, they need to protect the integrity of the message they're trying to convey. And I think we can all do our part to help them, because the other groups that are trying to destroy their mission, they're seeing some success, sadly.
I mean, you know, it's funny, you know, there have been so many acts in which we've actually had the opportunity to visualize the atrocity.
Yeah.
And I think for me, what has been so haunting about what happened to Breonna Taylor is that I am so impacted by it, and I didn't witness it.
Yeah.
You know, no one did.
Yeah.
And I think particularly for women, again, going back to something we talked about earlier, unless it is in a manner in which folks can consume with ease, and I know it's hard to like kind of say that, but unless they can watch it on their phone at their leisure, you know, or have it, you know, visualized for them, the pain of women, a woman who is sleeping in her bed, not bothering anyone, like her pain, her freedom to sleep in her home, right? Have that violated in many ways, I think. And I'm open to your opinion as well as someone, you know, coming from a media perspective. Does it make it harder now to convey that narrative to the public? Because there is no video. All you have is, in many ways, the vocalization initially of her experience through her sister and her mother, right? You know, initially it was other women, and there are so many great groups and so many people coming now together and focusing on this. But initially, it really was her mother and her sister saying, this can't stop here. We have to think through how to promote it. as a journalist, I'm curious about your thoughts with that dynamic. Would it have been easier if we had a video? And what does that mean? And how does that reflect upon our society, that we need that to really make moves in a different way?
Yeah, that's a great point, because, the nation generally wasn't talking about Breonna Taylor until George Floyd. The same with Elijah McClain, another innocent soul walking from a store, ambushed by police who got some random call about him looking suspicious. He had committed no crime whatsoever, and they killed him. And both of these tragic cases came back to life in the wake of George Floyd. So I think the job of journalists is to shine a light and keep the light on. I'm sure that local media in the same vicinity of Breonna Taylor reported on it and followed up, and there were protests as well, also for Elijah McClain, but the national press didn't pick up on it, that's for sure. And again, to your point about the video, there's no video of the killing of Breonna Taylor. And in fact, her boyfriend was arrested for jumping up and saying, oh, remember, these are plainclothes officers as well,
Sure.
right? So he jumped up and grabbed his gun to, thinking they're being burglarized or ambushed. He didn't know they were officers. They arrested him and charged him with it, and were ready to put him in jail and throw away the key when he was merely defending, his space. So once the national spotlight was cast on this tragic case, then they dropped the charges, but he was on the verge of going to jail for life himself. So, this is really, Camille, the times we are living in, very sad, very tragic, but we shouldn't need video.
Yeah.
We shouldn't need the video, to really drive home the point that Breonna Taylor was killed without cause. You can't say, oops, we made a mistake. Okay, well, her life didn't matter anyway, because we're at the other way around, and someone killed an officer and said, oops, I thought you were someone else. That's not acceptable, nor should it be. And that person should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. We love and respect our officers. But by the same token, they can't go in and say, oops, sorry about that. What is that? I'm not anti-officer in the least, but what is that? So if someone makes a mistake, they need to be prosecuted and get their day in court, and let a judge and jury, let's keep order and let's deal with it. But to just say, oh, don't worry about it. That I think strikes at the heart of who we are, you and I, and hopefully all Americans. We can't, this can't stand. And as we speak, Camille, no one has been held accountable for the death of Breonna Taylor.
No. It's really sad, you're free, they say, until of course you act too freely. But who knew that freedom to sleep in your home was one of the things we'd have to fight for? It's really sobering and unsettling.
Very much so.
There are a lot of folks weighing in, Cheryl, and something we mentioned earlier, this kind of, and I'm going to coin it after this interview, by the way, this kind of the small acts of courage, the small dose of courage that's so needed. But I think for so many New Yorkers, they're looking for kind of one or two big ways in which those two acts, may be able to help the city redirect its path and get back in a better place. And if you could, I know this is incredibly difficult given all the complexity of all the problems, nothing lives in a silo, but if you could see two changes in the city right now that would help us course correct, what would they be?
Oh boy, that's a deep question there. If I could see two changes in the city right now to help
that can help us with injustice and inequality.
Of course, correct. Okay, so I have one obvious answer. We need a sit down. I'm a big fan of movies like The Godfather and all that, so pardon my language, but we need a sit down with officers and members of the community. Because as the daughter of a first responder, and again, I respect police officers. I'm not happy with the demonization of police officers because too many officers risk their lives, all of them risk their lives for us. So it's hurtful to me to see that some people are cursing at them and trying to cut the brakes on their car. We did that story as well. That hurts me. We cannot paint them all with a broad brush. Not cool, not right, not fair for their tremendous sacrifice. Okay? But at the same time, I'm hurt that, you know, people are being killed by police and there's no accountability. I'm hurt for Eric Garner. He clearly didn't have a weapon. Why were all of you on him like he was an animal? Okay? So we need to sit down, region by region, where officers can talk to the people and have an understanding. I think that should happen immediately, region by region, because what's also happening is many officers are not familiar with the areas they're patrolling. So if you didn't grow up in this area and you see people acting in a way that you didn't see, perhaps, I'm not saying always, but perhaps you'll feel uncomfortable. Perhaps you will see them as a threat. Perhaps you will see them as the enemy. Perhaps you will see them as people that need to be put down, and you will draw judgments about them and then go back to your comfortable suburb where the normal people live. See, that's where we go off the tracks. I think the NYPD needs to be very careful who they place in certain communities. I think that is so important. And I think that would reduce the level of hostility because, frankly, having grown up in public housing, people know when you look at them like animals. They know it. They know when you're standing over them and you're not listening and you're looking at, you may not say it, but you're looking at them as, I don't hear you. Just shut up and do what I say. Well, that's not respect. That's what courtesy, professionalism, and respect, which is on police vehicles. That's not courtesy, professionalism, and respect. And by the same token, the members of our community have to respect the police officers.
Of course.
So we have two groups that kind of aren't listening to each other in some cases. And I would love to see a sit down where people get to know each other, neighborhood by neighborhood. And actually, I think they are trying to do that, but it's not happening fast enough. Secondly, I think that we need to take notes from that neighborhood in New Jersey that got rid of their police department and started over. It escapes me what neighborhood. It'll come to me in a second. But they started all over, and their police force, the top priority was community service.
Sure.
I don't know, it's somewhere, it's not far from Newark. But as a result, a lot of their crime has gone down. The community sees the police force differently with respect. They were all interviewed during this whole George Floyd thing. Yeah. And I want to see a healing of the communities. And I want our police to feel appreciated because I'm listening to them. And I can tell that they're like, you call us, we're in the line of fire, we'll risk our lives from you, and you're cursing and spitting at us. And then the people in the community are saying, well, you're coming here and you're looking at us like animals that need to be tamed. What do you expect? So we need a meeting of the minds so both sides can act in harmony. And I think if that happens, a lot of what we see will bring the level of hostility down. That's like my wish list.
Yeah, I think that's very helpful, Cheryl. I think and again, the town escapes me as well. I'm having a senior moment, but I want to say that one of the things that struck out about what happened with that town is I think on both sides, there was a deconstruction of the understanding of policing, even as simple as, calling 911. In New York City, to call 911 is synonymous with calling the cops, but you are really calling a dispatcher who's supposed to be trained to identify the nature of your emergency and direct accordingly. And
Right.
I feel like, you know, there's an to be fair to the police department, there's often over-reliance on that sense to, this is my only resource. This is the only thing
Right.
that can urgently attend to my issue. And that's who I'm going to call in. And to be fair to them, they're often not equipped to deal with some of the social justice, mental health, of the other crises that, you know, everyday New Yorkers face.
Right.
The last question I have for you, Cheryl, as we're talking about this, a lot of this conversation as well is hinging around kind of how we view violence and what we deem as violence in the city. And so one of my last questions to you is, you know, there are all these studies, and whether you take them at face value or not, that indicate that violence is rising. You know, so I've gotten a lot of inquiries now from the participants on this call, asking for your opinion as to whether you believe that rate or not. What do you think is bringing that on? Again, we've had this entire conversation in the kind of cocoon that is COVID, in the cocoon that is, you know, social, like economic unrest because of health disparities the nation, not just New York, but the nation is now facing. Right. But what do you think, as we think about all these elements, what do you think is really spurring on what people are coining as an increase in violence, an increase in civil unrest, even outside of some of the protests and the marches, you know, how we view violence in the city?
Well, I think if you let the NYPD share their statistics, every summer violence increases in New York City anyway. I think it's more magnified because of the stresses that we're living under. I think every New Yorker is under stress. More than 25,000 New Yorkers were killed by COVID, and families were torn apart. Children lost parents, grandparents, teachers, principals, police officers, first responders, healthcare workers. I think aside from this year just being awful, 2020, I mean, who can't wait until 2021? I don't want to ever say this year again, but this is a very stressful time. And I think it's being played out in many different ways. And I think that with the lack of opportunities and the unemployment and whatever other reasons that we may not know, violence, there's no doubt about it. New York City is not a fun place to be right now.
Sure.
So I think that the police have their work cut out for them. And I think community organizers like violence interrupters, like our friend from Queens, how dare I forget her name? You're a big fan of hers, with the beautiful white hair. Erica Ford. Violence interrupters like Erica Ford have their work cut out for them. And I know they are really on the front lines trying to see what happened all of a sudden, you know, because violence is just off the chain. So we need more violence interrupters. And again, that sit down with the NYPD and the community needs to happen.
Absolutely. And you know, Cheryl, we're out of time, and I'm actually happy that we had an audience to kind of benefit from what I get to do and call you and ask for your advice and seek your wisdom all the time. I'm happy that folks were also able to have this degree of intimacy and candor with you in so many important topics. I'm sorry that we're out of time, but I did want to take this opportunity to bring back Stephen, thank him for his leadership and have him close us out. But thank you again, Cheryl, for everything that you continue to do for the city and the work that you do on a daily basis at New York One.
Thank you, Camille. It's always a pleasure and an honor. And thanks to everyone for tuning in. I really appreciate it. Be safe the rest of the summer, everyone.
Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you, Camille. You both are so inspiring. And I say I have a lot to take away from this conversation. Cheryl, you talked about shining a light and keeping the light, both on the bad that must change and on the acts of courage, the little acts of courage. I thought that was really like a challenge to us all to embrace those acts of courage. And I think it is one that we intend to take up seriously. And so we are really grateful for your wisdom. I know it will make us better. I want to say, everybody, please join us next week. We have George Gresham, head of 1199 SCIU, interviewed by another great labor leader, Kyle Bragg, our 32BJ, and then in September with our great AG Tish James. I want to thank everybody for joining us. I want to thank our great speaker, Cheryl, and our moderator, Camille. Thank you, and I hope to see everybody again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.